All right, guys, so let's dig into August 22. Spain's stubborn possession of the Mississippi's mouth, that's the Mississippi River. Mouth of a river is like the bottom of the river. If you don't know, the Mississippi River empties into the Gulf of Mexico. And there was a time where Spain controlled that. If you don't know that, Spain and France both controlled it at one point. Kept alive the possibility that the U.S. would rip itself apart. Yet something unexpected changed the course of history. In 1791, Africans enslaved in the French Caribbean colony of Saint Domingue, today called Haiti, exploded in a revolt unprecedented in human history. Pause. Where was there a revolt? Haiti. Okay? Does anyone remember why Haiti was an important place to own? Like why the French really liked having Haiti? Yeah, they grew sugar there, right? They made money off of Haiti. What do we call the term for when one country takes over another part of the world? Imperialism, right? So this is talking about French imperialism in Haiti. Cool. Saint Domingue, which is what Haiti used to be called, the eastern third of the island of Hispaniola, was at the time the ultimate sugar island, the imperial engine of French economic growth, right? So he's just saying what you guys told me. They owned it so they can make money off of it. But on a single August night, the mill of the first slavery's growth stopped turning. All across Saint Domingue's sugar country, the most profitable stretch of real estate on the planet, enslaved people burst into the country mansions. They slaughtered the enslavers, set torches to sugar houses and cane fields, and then marched by the thousand on Cap Francaise, the seat of colonial rule. Thrown back, they regrouped. Revolt spread across the colony. How about give me another word for revolt? Rebellion, revolution, right? This is about the Haitian Revolution. It couldn't hurt to have in the back of your mind the guy who was responsible for this. Okay, write this down on the bottom. Toussaint? Oh, yeah. Yeah, right? If you saw it, you would recognize the name. That's L'Ouverture, Ture. That's the guy who led the Haitian Revolution. So it couldn't hurt to have him in the back of your mind. Do you guys remember a person who led revolution in South America? Simón Bolívar, very good. What was the short-term effect of the uprising described in the passage? Meaning, this happened, then what happened right after it? So what happens right after the Haitian Revolution? It's going to be one, right? Revolution in Haiti leads to Haiti becoming independent. How about this word, guys? Remind me what suffrage means. Suffrage is the right to vote, okay? These things might have happened, but the short-term effect, what happens right after, is number one. All right, tough one. Which group on Saint Domingue, meaning Haiti, stood to lose most of its wealth and power as a result of the Haitian Revolution? So who's going to lose wealth and power? Ford. Yes. How do we know it's Ford? It just said in the source, right? They raided the houses. The plantation owners are the Europeans. They're the ones making all the money off of growing sugar. Okay, so they're going to lose the most. Okay, so let's talk about the other groups. The enslaved Africans are not going to lose things because they're the ones that rose up, right? They're going to gain things now. Indigenous peoples are Native Americans. Native Americans, guys, were already dead at this point, right? That's why they brought Africans there in the first place, to be the slaves. Maybe you remember that from 9th grade. Mulattoes probably never even had wealth or power in the first place because this is like a group of mixed racial descent. Okay, mulattoes are a combination of someone who's born to a European parent and a Native American parent. Okay, the point is, it's the Europeans that are going to lose their land once the Haitian Revolution happens. I think that might be the hardest set on the whole test. Some of these are a lot easier. These two are pretty easy. Okay, Lin Se-Soo, a letter to Queen Victoria, 1839. What country do you think Queen Victoria is from?
Britain.
Yeah, Britain, okay? They're the ones that still have a monarchy in the 1800s. So this is, I'll just tell you because I already know, someone from China writing to the English Queen. So when she says I, it's the Chinese person speaking. I have heard that you are a kind and compassionate monarch. What's this word monarch?
Ruler.
Ruler, good. I am sure that you will not do to others what you yourself do not desire. I have also heard that you have instructed every British ship that sails for Canton, that's a part of China, not to bring any prohibited goods to China. What does it mean if something is prohibited?
Illegal.
Illegal, not allowed. So let's talk about this. We should already know what they're talking about.
Yes.
What's the illegal thing that the British were bringing to China?
Opium.
Opium. Good memories. Perfect. The fact that British ships have continued to bring opium to China results perhaps from the impossibility of making a thorough inspection of all of the ships owing to their large numbers, meaning there are too many ships to inspect all of them. I am sending you this letter to reiterate the seriousness with which we enforce the law of the Celestial Empire and to make sure that merchants from your honorable country will not attempt to violate it again. Right? So what the person is saying to the British is, serious, we're taking this very seriously. We're going to enforce drug laws in our country. So what do you think the purpose was of the letter was for? It's one, stop bringing in the opium. Number 4, what is a long-term result of the conflict described in this letter? So let's pause. What was the conflict? Good, Opium War. So the question is asking, what is a result of the Opium War? We'll talk about all of them, but what's the one here? Yes, it is 3. Do you guys remember the name of the treaty that ended the Opium War? Yeah, Treaty of Nanjing. So do you guys remember what Britain got in the Treaty of Nanjing? Unequal, meaning Britain got all the stuff and China got nothing, right? Britain got access to trade in China. They also got land. What's some of the land that the British got from the Chinese? Very good, both of you guys. Hong Kong goes to Britain. And the British got the exclusive right to trade in certain parts of China. Do you guys remember what that's called? Sphere of influence. Very good. All this means is that the British, like in certain parts of China, could sell to the Chinese knowing that the Chinese were not going to buy from anybody else. It's like you're guaranteeing yourself customers, right? You know that all the people in that part of China are only buying from you. It's a good way to make money. Okay, right? So that's the evidence that proves that this is an unequal treaty, right? Britain got all the stuff they wanted. China got none of it. Let's connect it to today a little bit. Tell me about this place now.
It's not under China.
It's now owned by China again, right? Do you guys remember why the people of Hong Kong are protesting all the time? Or they were protesting until recently?
Right.
They want to keep their rights, right? The British left in 1997, but they made the Chinese government promise that the people of Hong Kong were going to have freedoms. And now the Chinese government is saying, maybe not so much. How about this? This is kind of connected. What was this? Boxer Rebellion. That is China. That's a little bit later though, but I like where your mind's going. This is a rebellion in response to this. The people in China were really upset with the Europeans, and they were really upset with their own government for losing this war. Like, how could you guys do that? Britain is a little know-nothing country, right? China's one of the biggest empires in the world. Why are we losing, right? So the people ran around killing a bunch of Europeans. Maybe you could tell me who won the Opium War?
British.
Okay, right, so the British, maybe let me rephrase. What helped them win? Because Britain's way smaller than China. How come Britain won?
The opium weakened the
Opium weakened the Chinese. What else? Britain had better military technology, right? Britain had the Industrial Revolution already, right? They had steamships and machine guns and iron armor on their ships. The Chinese didn't, they weren't using that stuff just yet. Very good. Excellent, guys. Those were pretty easy, right? Let's go to 5 and 6. Imperial expansion in Southeast Asia, 1850 to the beginning of World War I. What does this kind of sound like, imperial? Imperialism, right? So all this map is showing is European countries and Asian countries, right? Japan is here too, but I see France, Britain, Portugal, Germany, Britain, Portugal, Germany, Britain. A lot of Europeans in this part of the world. This is Southeast Asia, all this here. So based on the map, countries from which part of the world gained the most power in Southeast Asia?
3.
Yeah, I think we made it pretty clear, right? How do I know that?
Britain.
Most of these things say European countries, right? I don't see any North America here. I don't think I see, no, there is, right? The USA is in the Philippines. I don't see any Africa. I don't see any Southwest Asia. That's like places like, I don't know, Persia and the Ottoman Empire, right? But no, I see a bunch of European countries, right? So that they are the ones that gain the most power in this part of the world. Which event played a major role in the expansion shown on this map? This is a hard one. This is asking you basically, which one of these things caused the imperialism? It's not World War I, because if the question asked which thing happened as a result of the map, then yes, we could pick World War I, right? Do you guys remember?
Date too.
You can look at the date too. Good call. Do you guys remember the causes of World War I? That acronym,
The assassination.
Yeah, that.
right? The MAIN, right? Militarism, alliances, imperialism, nationalism, and the assassination, right? So imperialism is here. It caused World War I. But the question is asking, what played a role in this being possible? You tell me, what's the connection? Why does this come first and then this? Okay, right? Being industrialized gave you the weapons to make this possible. And it also explains why they're here in the first place. Why does this mean I need to go here? For the resources, right? For the resources. Excellent, very good. Okay, so be careful. Ask yourself, is it asking me for a cause of the source, or is it asking me for a result of the source? Not too bad. Let's keep going. I think this one's a little tricky. So let's look at the cartoon. The architect of a new Turkey. Kemal is the guy's first name. What's his last name? Atatürk, right? Based on the cartoon, which concept influenced Kemal Atatürk's development? Right, so if you just knew the history, you could probably just get this one right. It is modernization. Okay? Laissez-faire means like complete capitalism stuff. Okay? How come it's not that? Well, he says the government is going to be planning some things in business, right? If the government is involved, it's not laissez-faire. I know it's confusing.
Westernization, like the same thing.
That's another clue, right? When you see Western customs, it's another way of saying this, right? When people are Westernizing, it's basically them saying, we want to copy Western Europe because we think Western Europe is the most modern place. That's all. Zionism means Jewish nationalism, and the idea that we should create a country for Jewish people in Israel has nothing to do with Kemal Atatürk, okay? It's not communism because he says republic as part of his ideas. Republic means you can vote for your leaders. You can't do that in communism. Okay, so modernization is our best one, and yes, that's, like Rob said, that's the best clue. Or one of you guys said westernization, right? These two terms go together. For the sake of review, who's another person from our studies this year who modernized and westernized their country? It is an M, rhymes with Kreiji, Meiji Restoration, right? Modernized, westernized Japan. How about, I'd be very impressed, how about Iran? Who was the guy who did it there? Shah Reza Pahlavi. All right, so in Iran, in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, this guy modernized and westernized Iran. This guy did it in Japan. Okay, Gandhi is a person who got India independent, but Gandhi was not a Western guy. He liked embracing Indian culture, not Western culture. All right, so for your westernization, modernization people, 3 people to know. Kemal Atatürk, Emperor Meiji, Shah Reza Pahlavi. I think those are your big 3. Which event led to Kemal Atatürk's development of a new Turkey? I think this is a really hard question. I guess it wasn't so hard. I love that. Why, tell me why it's easy. Why?
In the Middle East, and that's where the Ottoman Empire was.
Beautiful, right? Turkey's in the Middle East, Ottoman Empire is in the Middle East, right? Turkish people were part of the Ottoman Empire. And what was going on is the empire was declining and it lost World War I. So the people that were living there were like, wow, our empire is kind of falling apart. Why? How come we lost? Oh, we weren't modern. We weren't industrial. So they're trying to create a new country with whatever land was left over after losing a lot of it to the British and the French. That was going to be a country that was stronger. All the rest of the Ottoman Empire, what happened to the territories? Do you guys remember? It got split up. And who took control over it all?
British.
The British and the French, right? Those were the mandates. Maybe you remember that word, right? Good. I know I'm talking about a lot of things. I'm just trying to give you all the history connected to all these questions. But very good, guys, for getting that number 8. That was a hard one. Okay. Moving right along in chronological order. We've got a timeline. December 1931, Japanese army occupies Manchuria. Props to you guys if you could tell me where Manchuria is. League of Nations passes a resolution on the withdrawal of the Japanese army. Japan refuses and leaves the League of Nations. Let's talk about this for a second. What was the point of the League of Nations?
Peace.
To keep the peace in the world, right? They made it after World War I. Didn't work. So they made a new one after World War II. What was it called?
UN.
The United Nations and NATO. Yes, good. Italy invades Ethiopia. German troops reoccupy the Rhineland, which they were not supposed to do, according to the Treaty of Versailles. The Germans have a union with Austria. And then the Munich Agreement happens in 1938. In accordance with Appeasement, the British and the French agree to annexation of Sudetenland to prevent war. Czechoslovak government is not represented at the meeting. A lot of words here. Can you guys remind me what appeasement means? Giving in to a bully, right? So they gave in to Hitler. They said, fine, Hitler, you can have this part of Czechoslovakia. You just have to promise not to invade anything else. Did he keep the promise?
No.
No, we did not. Obviously. The significance of the events shown on this timeline is that they represent, what do they represent? 4 is your answer. Causes of World War II, right? These are all the things that led to World War II happening. It's 4, okay? So let's talk about number 1 though. I was about to talk about it anyway. Attempts to force empires to decolonize. Let's just talk about the word. Forget the D. What does it mean to colonize?
Take over.
To take over. If you put DE in front of it, what does it mean?
Not.
To not colonize, to give back. Does this sound like Hitler's giving things back?
No.
No, he's taking over. So I can't pick decolonize. Okay? Efforts by Manchuria and Czechoslovakia to maintain the balance of power. Balance of power means the countries have equal strength. If Czechoslovakia is giving up its own land, it doesn't sound like they're trying to stand up to Hitler and maintain a balance. So I'm going to cross that out. The expansion of communist forces into Europe and Asia. It doesn't really talk about that in the source, right? I don't see the Soviet Union expanding in this document. So I'm going to cross that out, right? But these were all problems that led to this happening. Because eventually, they're going to start standing up to Hitler. Maybe for the sake of review, you guys can remind me, what was the event that actually started World War II? Hitler invades Poland, yes, right? And that would be like at the very end of this timeline. Cool. What was one consequence of the events shown on this timeline? Another way of asking, which one of these happened after all of these events?
1.
Yes. But can you tell me why 2 is wrong?
It's not on Berlin.
It's not on Berlin, right? What was it on? Hiroshima, Nagasaki. Very good. Tell me why 3 is wrong.
That happened before.
Happened before. Good man, Rob. How about 4? Why is 4 wrong? It's World War I. See? You guys are going to rock this. Very good. Make sure, guys. I know you're going to want to get out of there as soon as you can. Go through every answer choice, please, before you pick one. Okay? Try to narrow it down before you start picking. Let's keep going. Address given by President Harry Truman to a joint session of Congress on March 12th, 1947. If it's 1947, which event just ended? Or ended kind of recently? World War II and the Holocaust. Good. Right. So this is right after World War II. So let me ask you this. What's the new conflict after World War II? Soviet Union and the US. Cold War. Good. Right. So I already know this is going to be a Cold War document because I know it's a document about Harry Truman. So it's going to be something called the Truman Doctrine. Do you guys remember anything about the Truman Doctrine or the Marshall Plan?
Yeah, they like.
It's about containing communism, right? By giving countries money to rebuild so that they can resist communism. So let's see if the document talks about that stuff. The peoples of a number of countries of the world have recently had totalitarian regimes forced upon them against their will. Tell me about this word totalitarian. What does it mean if the government is totalitarian? Total control, right? When the government controls every aspect of your life. Not just the government, but what you see on TV, what you learn about in school, what religion you're allowed to have. So Truman, the US president, is saying a lot of countries in the world have been forced to become this, even if they don't want to. The government of the US has made frequent protests against coercion, meaning being forced to do something, and intimidation in violation of the Yalta Agreement in Poland, Romania, and Bulgaria. I must also state that in a number of other countries, there have been similar developments. So the Yalta Agreement happens right at the end of World War II. And this, if you don't remember, is when Stalin promised that Eastern European countries could have free elections, right? So Stalin told the US that when World War II is over, if there's a country in the world that wants to be democratic, right, and have elections, they could do it. Did he keep his promise?
No.
No, Stalin doesn't keep his promises. So you tell me, what happened? I asked you guys this on Tuesday, and I think Rob told me the answer. What happened to those Eastern European countries?
Satellite.
They became satellite states. Can you guys define that for me? They were forced, right? They were controlled by somebody else. So Stalin, and that's what the source is saying, that Stalin broke his promises. How? He's forcing the Eastern European countries to be satellite states. And Truman's like, I don't like that so much. That's not cool. At the present moment in world history, nearly every nation must choose between alternative ways of life. The choice is too often not a free choice. I believe that it must be the policy of the US to support free peoples who are resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities or by outside pressures. So he says the US's job is to support people who are being forced to do something they don't want to do. I believe that we must assist free peoples to work out their own destinies in their own way. So which development is associated with this situation? Yeah, it's the Cold War, right? What he's basically saying here is that we have to support countries that are being forced to become communist. And the way they went about it, this is an N, by the way, sorry about that, was to give countries money to support them and to help rebuild and resist communism. Truman Doctrine, Marshall Plan was the same thing, right? Two efforts to contain the spread of communism. If we're talking about containing communism, that's the Cold War time period. Cool. For the sake of review, tell me what happened at the Berlin Conference. Or tell me what place in the world goes with Berlin Conference. The city is Germany, but Africa. Beautiful answer, right? That's where they decided that the European countries are going to take over Africa, right? And who's going to get what? What happened here? Armenian Massacre. Let me break this down. What happens in a massacre? People get killed, okay? The Armenians, this is way early in the school year, right? But Armenians were a Christian group in the Ottoman Empire that got massacred, okay? So this happened during the Ottoman Empire. What's a word that we use for when one group's trying to annihilate another? Because the Ottomans were trying to annihilate the Armenians. Genocide. What's another term? Ethnic cleansing could be another. Nuremberg trials we saw, right? That's the Holocaust trials, right? So Cold War is the best answer. All right. Nice short one. Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 1948. It would be a good idea, and if you don't know, it's on the bottom. It would be a good idea to know who made this document.
United Nations.
United Nations, yes. Okay, the United Nations, created after World War II to kind of do what the League of Nations couldn't do, which is keep world peace and protect human rights around the world. Right? So this is the UN saying part of our mission in this organization is to defend these things. Right? These are the things we believe all humans should have, and we're going to work to defend them. And they sound kind of familiar. Life, liberty again. So yeah, we're seeing some John Locke influence. What's the time period where John Locke was talking about stuff? The Enlightenment. Good. You'll see why it's a good idea to brainstorm in a second, because we just wrote down basically one of the answers. Exactly. The intended purpose of this document, well, all human beings are born free and equal. They have reason. They should act towards one another like they're brothers. Everyone's got the right to life. No one should be tortured. So what's the reason for writing this document? Yeah, this is hard.
That was just hard.
Really hard, because you have to know what that word means.
I don't know what atrocities are.
Yeah, what's atrocity?
Like a disaster.
Yeah, a really horrible event, right? The Russian invasion of Ukraine, atrocity. I know, it's hard, right? Holocaust is an atrocity. Okay, so you tell me, before we end for today, well, maybe we'll do number 13 as well. How are these two things connected? Number 4 in this document. Yeah, atrocities happen when people are denied their rights. If I'm protecting people's lives, I am preventing atrocities. Does that make sense? That means I can't. If I'm going to protect lives, I'm going to try to prevent another Holocaust. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
A hard one, right? Make sure you know that word. Atrocity is a really horrible event in history. Let's do one more. The ideals contained in the document are closely associated with what? It is two. Enlightenment thinkers. How do I know that? It says life, liberty, and we know those are John Locke and Enlightenment things. That's all. Let's do one more. I lied. The document was drafted largely in response to what?
Holocaust.
Yeah. So again, be careful with these, right? This is their way of asking which one of these things caused the document. The Holocaust was an atrocity that then caused the world, right, the United Nations to say, we're not going to let this happen ever again. Wait, before you pack up, tell me what country goes with Rwanda. Or let me rephrase. What continent goes with Rwanda? Africa. Okay, and this is the 1990s. So something that happened in the future could not cause this document from 1948.
The genocide, I forgot.
That was when there were two groups in the country. One tried to wipe out the other. Hutus and Tutsis. Kind of like Iraq, but with different people. We'll talk more about Iraq tomorrow. And now we're looking at 15. And it's a picture that is fuzzy because it was taken really, really high in the sky in 1962. And it's talking about ballistic missile base in Cuba. And the name of the source talks about the Cuban Missile Crisis. So what can you tell me about this moment in history? Tell me the broad picture of what's going on here. Yeah, okay, so Darren's touching on the arms race, right? The big picture thing is that us and which other empire were building nuclear missiles at a rapid pace? Soviet Union, right? The arms races between us and the Soviet Union during the Cold War, right? There are other countries that developed nuclear missiles in later years, but this is the Soviet Union putting missiles in Cuba, right? Because what kind of system did Cuba start using in the late 1950s, early 60s? They became communist, okay? Does anyone remember the name of the person that led a communist revolution in that country? Very good, guys. Fidel Castro. Yeah. All right, so Fidel Castro turned Cuba into a communist country, and America tried to undo that. We launched a failed invasion of Cuba to try to make them non-communist again. It didn't work, but now Castro is feeling threatened. He's like, at any point, the US might try to invade again. We gotta do something to prevent that from happening. So he made friends with the Soviet Union, and they start putting missiles in Cuba, but we have spy planes, and we flew over Cuba, and we saw what was going on, right? And that made us get a little bit nervous. So this is a very critical time period in the Cold War, right? A period of heightened tensions, and we wanted them to get the missiles out of Cuba, and eventually we were able to force them to do that. But the location identified by this photograph, the location is Cuba. Is Cuba close or far away from the U.S.? It's really close. It's 90 miles off the coast of Florida. It's in the Caribbean. So the location identified by this photograph was considered strategically important because of what?
Distance from the U.S.
Distance from the U.S. Okay? Position in the mid-Atlantic doesn't make any sense, okay? Because in the middle of the Atlantic, there's really not much going on at all, right? You've got the Eastern Hemisphere and you got the Western Hemisphere, not much in the middle, right, in the oceans. Cuba is not in the middle of the Atlantic. It's like next to the Americas, right? It's on one side of the Atlantic. It is a tropical climate, but that doesn't make it strategically important, right? What do I mean when I say something is strategically important? It's good for your military, right? It's good for your power, right? Having access to a tropical climate is not really going to do much for your power, perhaps, right? Mineral resources, the best answer here is distance from the U.S., right? This gives the Soviet Union basically a way to launch a nuke at us relatively easily if this had succeeded. This is a very hard question, in my opinion. Which term is most closely associated with the situation? It is. Explain to me again what arms race means.
Nuclear warfare.
Two sides, right? Building as many weapons as they can, right? Typically it's associated with nuclear arms race. Can somebody remind me what non-alignment means? Remind me what non-alignment means? Yeah, you're neutral, right? You don't pick a side. This is a term that applies mostly to places like India during the Cold War, because India was newly independent. They didn't want to be part of the two alliances because they were not ready to participate in a war if one started. Maybe somebody could remind me, what were the two competing Cold War alliances? NATO, right? So there was NATO. What was the other one? The Warsaw Pact, right? Maybe we write those down. NATO versus Warsaw Pact. The Warsaw Pact was the Soviet Union's alliance with its satellite countries. Somebody says satellite countries, right? NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is the one that the US was and is a part of. So non-alignment means you don't pick a side. Well, Cuba is picking a side, right? Because Cuba starts working with the Soviet Union. This is the opposite of non-alignment. Perestroika is another, it's a Russian word. Does anybody remember which Russian leader used that policy? We talked about this a couple days ago. Gorbachev. Very good, Wayne. Okay, this is a word that means capitalism.
The third one is like French, right?
It is a French word. It's pronounced détente, and it means,
Like famine.
it's not famine.
Strained relations.
This means easing of tensions, right? It looks like al dente pasta or something. So it can't be détente because this is not easing tensions. This is the most tenuous time period in the entire Cold War. This is where we thought World War III might happen. So it's the opposite of easing tensions. Arms race is definitely the best answer. Alrighty, so let's move to 17 and 18. These are really hard. We've got the Six-Day War in 1967. Does anyone remember what happened in the Six-Day War, or what part of the world that happened in? Okay, this is a Palestine conflict. What happened during the Arab-Israeli conflict? Okay, so it is a really important religious piece of property because Jerusalem is there, right? So it's important for Christians, Muslims, and Jews. And there are two sides that are fighting over it, right? You've got Jewish people who have Israel in this area, and then the Muslims are also competing for that territory, right? And they both believe that it's a really important religious site, and they both have a certain claim to that land, right? Jewish people are like, we were here first, right? This is our ancient kingdom. And the Muslims are like, we've been here a while, like this is our land too. So both sides are kind of fighting over it, and they have been since basically this moment in history. Because what happens is the British, after World War I, right, they had mandates in the Middle East. You guys remember that word mandate? It's kind of like a colony. So the British controlled Palestine, and then they made promises to both religions. They said, okay, Muslims, one day we'll let you have your own country in this part of the world when you guys are ready for independence. And then they said the same thing to the Jewish people, because they started to feel bad for Jewish people after some of the prejudice that they've been facing in places like Russia, and especially after the Holocaust. So it's like, wow, we made these promises to both groups. What do? I know, we'll just divide the land up 50-50. But that didn't make anybody happy. It didn't make either side happy. So we've got two writings about this event, the Six-Day War, which is when the Jews and the Muslims went to war over land in Palestine. Okay, ultimately what happens is, after this war, Israel becomes a larger country. So let's take a look. Sir, if you were to offer a Nation for the Year award, my vote would go to Israel. For the past 19 years, this bastion of democracy has survived in spite of the Arab commandment, harass thy neighbor. Kind of making a play on words there with the Bible. This tiny nation may yet fulfill the biblical prophecy of being a light unto all nations. Let's hope the United Arab Republic is one of the first to see the light. So this person is basically saying, Israel should get mad props, right? They've survived despite the fact that so many countries around Israel don't like Israel. At the time, United Arab Republic was like a united country between Egypt and Syria. So this guy is saying, hopefully that the Middle Eastern countries around Israel one day will see that Israel is an important place and we should leave it alone and support it. So over here, we got a different point of view. Sir, the Times' lavish contribution in the form of a cover story to the Israeli cause is exceeded only by the distorted, sketchy coverage afforded the plight of the Arabs. What does it mean if someone's experiencing plight? Have you heard that word before? Rough times, right? Not good times. So this guy is saying the Arabs have experienced plight, right? Yes, Israel might be successful, but no one's talking about the suffering that the Arabs have had. The Arabs were the group that was practicing Islam, right? The Muslims in that region. Neither eloquent oratory, meaning speeches, nor military victories can decide the rights of people. Win or lose, the underlying principle for the Arab struggle is no less justified. Where was indignant, meaning angry, world opinion in 1947 when third parties paid off political debts with land that they did not own? So what he's saying here is, how come no one said anything when the British made promises to Jewish people at the expense of the Muslims? Like, where was the outrage? Because basically what happened was the world took land away from the Muslims and gave it to the Jews. How come there was no outrage about that, is what the person is asking. Where were those who now call for justice when these parties permitted the Arab to be ejected from the land he has owned for generations? Perhaps only history will vindicate the Arab cause, but what of today? Right, so this guy's basically saying, like, it's great that, Israel is successful, but that success came at a price. The people that were already living there have been suffering as a result of these conflicts and as a result of Israel's continued growth. So the primary concern from the Arab perspective is going to be which one of these things. This is really hard. It is one. The international community failed to support their land claims. Okay? What he's saying here is that it's referring to this quote right here. Right? Where was the world when the Arabs start to suffer? Right? They didn't get any support. That's the evidence that proves that choice one is correct. Israel may not fulfill its biblical destiny. We can't pick that one because it's saying that Israel might actually fulfill its destiny. Okay, it says that right here. This is probably the hardest question on the entire test. 18, which turning point led to the 1967 war that inspired these letters? Okay, so the Persian Gulf War happens in 1990 to 1991. This is when the U.S. went to Iraq to make sure that the oil supply would not be blocked off by a crazy dictator named Saddam Hussein. So we can't say that this led to 1967 war because it happened after. It's not 3, because this is when angry Muslims were getting violent towards Israelis in the 1980s. Okay, it is 2. So none of these things would be talked about if they didn't create Israel in the first place, right? Because they put Israel in the Palestinian region. What I think I should do is maybe show you guys a map about this. This is the land of Palestine, right? And the agreement was to split it basically in half. The yellow would be the Arab state where the Muslims would live. The orange would be the Jewish state called Israel where Jews would live. So if this split of the region never happened, then we wouldn't have these debates. Okay, so the creation of Israel is the turning point that led to the 1967 war that they're talking about here. So this happened in 1973, and this is a moment in which Egypt told the entire world that they respect Israel's right to exist. They made peace with Israel. Okay, so that was like an effort at peace, whereas this is showing us conflict, so we can't pick that one, and it happened in 1973. If you guys didn't know, before Vietnam had United States involvement, it was a French colony. So if it was a French colony, again, it's a document about what broad term? What do we call it when one place is colonizing another place? Imperialism again, right? This is a very, very popular topic on the regions. Okay, Vietnam is in Southeast Asia. It's where a lot of spices are produced. Okay, so a lot of Europeans for a long time wanted to take control of those parts of the world. And then later on, the United States gets involved in Vietnam. But first it was the French. Economic development always involved what benefited France and her French colonists, not the Vietnamese. So this person is saying that the French being in Vietnam is not benefiting Vietnam, it's benefiting French people. Vietnam was kept as dependent on the mother country as possible, both as a source of raw materials, right? Like you guys tell me all the time, right? We go to places to get raw materials, meaning natural resources, and as a captive market for goods. Customs regulations were designed to promote French products and discourage competition from foreign goods, thus restricting the consumer in what he could buy. So basically a fancy way of saying in Vietnam, there were laws passed that basically discouraged people from buying anything except French products. And that process was going to make France a lot of money, but really hurt the Vietnamese economy, right? Because they were forced to basically buy French products. The same thing was going on in India and also in China around the same time period. A less short-sighted administration could have predicted the eventual outcome of these restrictive policies, but it took raw armed force to shock the French and the rest of the world into the realities of the situation. In a few words, the people were getting fed up. Basically what happens is in the 1950s, the Vietnamese launch a revolution against the French, a communist revolution. The French get wiped out in Vietnam, and then the United States says, well, if we allow the French to lose this, communism is going to win in Vietnam. So we better start sending people into Vietnam to keep it from becoming communist. Okay, that's how American involvement started. But this is talking about more French involvement, right? Why the French were in Vietnam and how the Vietnamese reacted to the French being there. So which statement best describes this person, Tran Van Don's, point of view regarding the French, right? Point of view is opinion. So what is his opinion about the French being in Vietnam? 3, Vietnam's economic development was restricted. How'd you come to that conclusion? It's the French policies were hurting Vietnam, right? Maybe restricted is another way of saying that the economy is being hurt, right? And the restrictions are also in the latter half of this paragraph, right? How if you were if you were Vietnamese, you were kind of forced to buy things from France and not have many options in what you could buy, right? Those sound like economic restrictions. We can't say that the economies of France and Vietnam benefited both, right? Because it's saying how one was being hurt. The Vietnamese exported many consumer goods. Doesn't talk about that at all. What does it mean to export something?
To send out.
Yeah, to sell and ship out, right? At this time, they're not really exporting a lot in Vietnam, right? So we can't pick that one. Today, it's different. A lot of things are made in Vietnam, but not back then. Vietnam's economy benefited from the French. No, he's saying that their presence hurt the Vietnamese. Which of these countries experienced a similar economic relationship with the colonial power? India. The British did the same thing in India, right? They passed all these laws restricting the trade of the Indian people, right? Indian people weren't allowed to make their own clothing at a certain point, right? So you had to buy your stuff from the British. And yes, that made the British very rich, but the people of India were upset about that. And then Gandhi launches his rebellion. Peaceful protest. That was a hard one. What was the long-term effect of the situation described in the passage? So what do you think happens as a result of the Vietnamese getting fed up and resorting to armed force?
1.
Yes. Vietnamese nationalism led to bloody conflict. Because somebody remind me what nationalism means.
Pride in one's country.
Pride in one's country, right? You're going to look out for your own people before you look out for somebody else, right? So the Vietnamese wanted to look out for the needs of the Vietnamese, but the French were interfering with that. So what do? You go to war. And then, like I said, once the French leave, the United States comes in to try to put down this communist uprising. Cool. Let's keep going. All right, so it's a source here, reading Lolita in Tehran. Do you guys know what country Tehran is the capital of? Or maybe you can figure it out using the source. What country is being mentioned there? Yeah, this is the capital of Iran. Do you remember anything about Iran from this school year? Okay, right, so women's rights are restricted in Iran, sorry. What else? Economy isn't good, right? What's wrong with the economy? Why is it hurting? What if I say this? Sanctions. Tell me about that word. Yeah, a restriction on trade, right? Basically, we don't trade with Iran. We don't sell stuff to them. We don't buy stuff from them. The point being, we want to make them suffer so that they make changes. Why do we want them to suffer? What's a problem in that country that makes us a little bit nervous, perhaps? Yeah, weapons. What's the weapon that we're scared of? Nuclear weapons, right? So for a long time, we were worried that Iran was building nuclear weapons, so we decided to hurt their economy so that they would stop doing that. Okay, how do we hurt their economy? With sanctions. And we had a bad relationship with Iran basically since like 1979. Do you guys remember what happened? So in 1979, there was the Iranian Revolution. There was a guy in charge of Iran named Shah Reza Pahlavi. He might actually be, yeah, he's in the source. And he's a guy that the United States liked, okay, because he allowed us to get good deals on oil. He supported women's rights. He was a modern and Western kind of guy. But the conservative religious Iranians didn't like this guy because he was making all kinds of changes. So the hardcore Muslims, the Islamic fundamentalists, if you will, rose up against that government and took over the country. And they even took over the United States Embassy building and took people hostage. Right? Remember the hostage crisis? We mentioned that. It was in, I think, one of your homework assignments, right? Hostage crisis. So we don't really like Iran since 1979 because they kept Americans hostage for over a year. They finally let them go in 1981. So between 79 and 81, they were under Iranian control. From the beginning of the revolution, that's this revolution in 1979, where that Ayatollah Khomeini guy came to power. Maybe we write him down. Okay, that's the guy associated with the Iranian Revolution, a religious leader. And that's an important thing to know as well, is that in Iran today, the most important leaders are still the religious leaders, which is kind of weird because in our society, it's not like that. Do you guys remember the fancy word we used for the kind of government that's run by religious leaders? Theocracy. This is a government run by religious leaders. Okay, that's what Iran has been since 1979. So again, just some outside information for the source. I'll go back to this in a second if you need to copy that down. So since that revolution where the theocracy was put in place, there have been many aborted, meaning failed, attempts to impose the veil on women. These attempts failed because of persistent and militant resistance put up mainly by Iranian women. Just like we talked about, right? The women want to continue being modern. They want to have the rights and freedoms that they had when that Shah guy was in power. In many important ways, the veil had gained a symbolic significance for the regime. Regime is a word for government. Its reimposition would signify the complete victory of the Islamic aspect of the revolution, which in those first years was not a foregone conclusion. The unveiling of women, mandated by Reza Shah in 1936, had been a controversial symbol of modernization. Right? So that guy forced the veils to come off when he was in power. So this was a powerful sign of the reduction of the clergy's power. Right? So when the Shah was in charge, he reduced the power of the clergy. Clergy is like religious people, like priests if it was Catholicism. It was important for the ruling clerics to reassert that power. All this I can explain now with the advantage of hindsight, but it was far from clear then. So he's saying that after the revolution, the religious people wanted to take power back from the people who wanted to modernize, right? So there's this tension going on between people in Iran who want to be modern and people in Iran who want to be traditional, and both are just going at it to try to seize power. This is a hard question in my opinion. Based on the passage, which statement best describes the significance of the government regulations involving the veiling and unveiling? Modernization created power shifts that led to conflict. Okay, the reason why I know this is because the source mentions that modernization took over in the early part of the 1900s. Then religious leaders took power back from them, right? So it's like a cycle, if you will, of power. Okay, power shift, meaning power goes from one person to another. Can you tell me why number 2 is wrong?
Because they weren't protected.
They weren't protected, right? They told the women, listen, you have to wear a veil. Clerics supported change? No. Typically, religious leaders are old school, okay? So when you see the word cleric, you think religious leader. Typically, they're the ones that are going to stick to the old school values, the Islamic fundamentalist values. Emigration to culturally compatible countries was prohibited. Let's talk about the words. Let's start with this one. Tell me what prohibited means. Yeah, exactly, right? So prohibited means you can't do it. What does emigration mean? Kind of sounds like immigration. Maybe we think about that word and then we can use this one. What does it mean if you are an immigrant? A foreigner, right? So an immigrant is someone, like if I'm living in America, an immigrant is someone who came to my country from somewhere else. An emigrant or emigration is leaving to go somewhere else, right? Not coming, it's like you're going. So it doesn't say that women were prohibited from going somewhere else in the source. So since I can't prove it using the document, I'm going to cross that one out. This is tough because you have to kind of understand what they mean by power shift, right? What's the shift? The shift went from being modern to being traditional in Iran. And that has led to conflict. What's the conflict? There's been protests, militant resistance put up by Iranian women, right? Militant resistance means violence. There's your conflict. Does that make sense? That's hard, right? But I think we can cross off 2 and 3 relatively easily and get it down to 1 and 4. And then ask yourself, if I can't find it in the source, or tell yourself rather, if I can't find it in the source, I can't pick it. And the source says nothing about women leaving Iran to go live somewhere else. Cool. Well, let's keep going to 23. I think these are a little bit easier. Okay, so we've got here what history can teach us about contemporary Afghanistan. So why don't we talk about some history associated with Afghanistan before we do anything else. Do you guys remember anything from Afghanistan that we've learned about this year? Like what comes to mind? Let's start with the basics. Rich country or poor country? Poor country, right? A lot of poverty there. What do we call a country where there's a lot of poverty and not a good economy? What kind of country is that? I'll give you 2 options. Developed or developing? Developing, okay? So we'll put developing nation. Sometimes they call these third world nations. It's not a term they use a lot these days because it's kind of, I suppose, politically incorrect. It's like ranked, right? You're at the bottom of a list. So, but you never know. Maybe you'll see it. Third world nation. Can you guys tell me the group that's in power in Afghanistan today? You guys did this, yeah. The Taliban, good. Okay, and the Taliban have had a long history in Afghanistan. The Taliban took power in the late 1990s. Okay, we kicked them out in 2002. Do you guys remember why we kicked them out in 2002 or why we were there? There was a 9/11 connection. Okay, basically Al-Qaeda, the terrorist group that was responsible, was doing its training in Afghanistan and under the protection of the Taliban. Okay, so we go there in 2002. We left only a couple of years ago. We spent a lot of time there trying to make Afghanistan a secular country, meaning non-religious, and to rebuild their economy and to try to reduce the influence of terrorist organizations and to kick out the Taliban. But what happened once the United States left Afghanistan a couple years ago? They rose back up to power. Okay, so the Taliban are still in power. We couldn't get rid of them all. They started practicing a certain type of warfare in which they're always sneaking around and just waiting for their moment. Do you guys remember that kind of warfare? Guerrilla warfare, right? Tell me about women's rights in Afghanistan under the rule of the Taliban. No women's rights. When the United States was in charge of Afghanistan, or at least occupying Afghanistan, women had rights. Women were allowed to go to school. Now that the Taliban is back in charge, they promised that girls would still be able to go to school once the United States left and the Taliban took over, but they broke that promise. Extremely controversial. How about before the Taliban? Which superpower invaded Afghanistan and spent 10 years there in the 70s and 80s? The Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in 1979. What is always the goal of the Soviet Union when they're invading places? What are they looking to try to do? Yes, spread communism. Good. And a lot of people say, and this comes up on the Regents a lot, that this failed invasion of Afghanistan inevitably causes the decline and fall of the Soviet Union because they spent so much time, money, and resources to try to accomplish that goal. Ultimately, they failed. Why did they fail? The United States supported an opposition group to these guys, a group called the Mujahideen. They were religious warriors. So we armed them, we trained them, we helped them use guerrilla warfare against the Soviet Union. And then when the Soviet Union left, some of those guerrilla fighters became the Taliban. So those two things are kind of connected together. So that's some good stuff to know about before we approach this document. With growing unrest at home over the loss of Soviet soldiers in Afghanistan and the inability of the society to wage a foreign war and provide the essentials of life to its own citizens, the USSR was forced to retreat in ignominious, meaning humiliating, defeat in February 1989, fewer than 10 years after its invasion. This proved to be the final straw on the Soviet camel's back. What does it mean if something is the final straw? Like the last thing, right? This is the last thing that's going to cause some kind of problem. By the end of the same year, the Berlin Wall was down and the Warsaw Pact was dead. Within 2 years, the Soviet Union was history. So based on the passage and our discussion here, what impact did the invasion of Afghanistan have on the Soviet Union? 2 is correct. Helped bring about the end of the Soviet Union. How do you know, Rob? What does it say? Let's say, for example, like you're at the Regents and you forget all this stuff right here.
Said in the passage.
It said. Where did it say in the passage?
Like the last.
There you go. Soviet Union was history, meaning gone. Right? That's another way of saying the collapse. Very good. Make sense? Cool. I can't say that it increased the Soviet Union's ability to provide for their own people, right? It sounds like, they're struggling. The inability to provide the essentials of life, right? It says they can't do it. So that's why we cross off something like choice 1. All right? Well, let's keep going. Oh, big giant picture. And we see this guy. So tell me everything we can recall about Nelson Mandela. Apartheid, good call. What does it mean, right? Segregation of the races. Pat, do you know the country that goes with this? South Africa, very good. Right, when you see Nelson Mandela, you automatically think apartheid, South Africa. Okay, so Nelson Mandela is the guy who worked to try to end apartheid in South Africa. But he led this group of people called the African National Congress, just like Gandhi led what we'd call the Indian National Congress, just a group of people working to achieve their goals, whether it's independence or to end apartheid. But what they did was try to organize boycotts of South African products. Do you guys remember what boycotts means? It's definitely going against, right? It's like an economic way of going against, refusing to buy, right? So what Nelson Mandela and his followers encouraged was to stop, to try to get the whole world to stop buying stuff from South Africa, because then the government would suffer, right? They couldn't maybe collect a lot of tax dollars and they'd be forced to make changes. What's another country in the world where we do similar things, where we don't buy stuff from those countries to try to hurt them and force them to change? What are some other countries we do that with? Russia, North Korea, not with India, they're our good friends, right? So these kinds of boycotts, we would call these maybe sanctions. And we do sanctions on several countries. Russia is one for sure, North Korea, Iran, and then there's a communist country in the Caribbean that we don't trade with either. Cuba, exactly, right? So we do these things in a lot of parts of the world. Sometimes they've been successful, sometimes maybe not, right? Because maybe there's still a country willing to trade with that country and it kind of ruins the whole effect. For example, it would be crushing to Russia, these sanctions right now. Like not even McDonald's operates in Russia anymore. Like literally no Big Macs in Russia. But there are still some countries that trade with Russia. So that kind of undermines our efforts a little bit. But anyway, this is good outside information to know before we approach this, right? So this is like a comic book kind of document, which is pretty funny. Hard to read, it's small text. Before sunrise on April 27th, 1994, people started flocking to polling stations. People waited patiently and happily for hours in long queues. Most had never voted in their lives. This is a funny word that's used in England for standing in line. It's a weird thing, okay? So according to his first passage, in 1994, why are people standing in line? To do what? To vote, okay? Because they never had a chance to vote before, so they're really excited, so they're waiting in a massive line. Nelson Mandela chose to vote at, what does it say, Olange High School in Natal, near the grave of John Dube, a co-founder, I think it's pronounced Dube or Dube, a co-founder of the African National Congress. That's that ANC thing. As he walked from the grave to the school, he remembered the people who gave their lives fighting for a free South Africa. Mr. Mandela, who are you voting for? You have to keep in mind, he was running for president. So right, they're kind of joking like, oh, are you going to vote for yourself or not? Right? People always vote for themselves, I'm sure. I've been trying to make a decision all morning, right? Kind of joking as he's saying that. Of course, he's going to vote for himself, right? And this was his competition. This was the last white president of South Africa before he got voted out, right? And he's the one that also, to his credit, helped bring about the end of apartheid. There was just so much protest and unrest and too many sanctions, he kind of had to give up his power, so to speak. The election was closely watched by the world. About 200,000 observers and officials witnessed as 29 million people voting peacefully. Witnessed 29 million people voting peacefully. There were some chaotic areas, particularly in KwaZulu-Natal. Right? So maybe there were some conflict. Maybe there was some tension between black voters and white voters, right? Because white voters were, used to being the only people who could vote, and they really wanted this guy to stay in power because maybe they thought he would protect their interests. So maybe some conflict broke out, while people were waiting in line, right? I'm sure there was some conflict breaking out between Trump and Biden voters in the 2020 election on some of those lines, right? So it's not all that abnormal, if you will. So this is crazy. This is how it appeared on the Regents. This whole big picture is here, and then you got to flip to the next page for the questions, which is annoying because you might be tempted to flip back and forth. But it's not that bad because these are pretty easy. Which claim is best supported by the information in the illustration, the comic book? It is one, right? The end of apartheid allowed black South Africans to participate in national elections for the first time. How do we know it's the answer? Yeah, it's in the source, exactly, right? They never had a chance to do it before, and now many, many people are waiting in line to do it. Okay, so it literally says it right there. But we should look at the other answer choices, right? And I would encourage you guys, when you're doing the Regents, try not to just go to the first answer and think that it's right and then move on, right? Make sure you have some idea about why the other ones are wrong. Violence in South Africa led to injury and death contributing to a revolution. Can't pick that one, right? Because it did mention violence a little bit. There was some chaos. Exactly, right? Whoever said that, I think it was Pat, right? Did not mention revolution, so I can't choose it. Economic sanctions by international powers led to political and economic hardships for many South Africans. Is it in the source? No, right? It says what is best supported by the information in the illustration. Pick the answer choice that comes from the source when you get that question. All right, so number one is definitely our best answer. After his victory, this is the one you guys were mentioning yesterday, right, from the test. After his victory, which course of action was recommended by the leader depicted in the illustration? I thought this is tough. So let's talk about this, okay? So the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was, to oversimplify it, basically something like the Nuremberg trials. Do you guys remember anything about the Nuremberg trials? After the Holocaust, right? We're putting people on trial for the horrible things that they did, right? Typically the Nazis. This was not quite a trial, but what happens is Nelson Mandela becomes the president of South Africa, okay? And what they try to do is dig into the history of South Africa to kind of figure out whose rights were violated and how, and try to come to some kind of peace with it all, if that makes any sense, to try to understand what went wrong and how we can move forward, to try to dig up all the evidence of the things that happened. And that led to a lot of white South Africans, apologizing for their actions in an attempt to try to bring about some degree of reconciliation, meaning coming to an understanding and, trying to forgive each other on both sides. So that is super hard because you kind of needed to know that, but I think you can maybe eliminate some of these answer choices, right? Yeah, this happens before Nelson Mandela becomes president, right? So he says, okay, I'm in charge now. I'm recommending that we do this. But this is before he was in charge. So that's why this one is incorrect. And Nelson Mandela was never a communist, okay? This is like already the end of the Soviet Union. So he didn't do collective arms. He didn't do communism. So if you know that he wasn't a communist and you know that this came before taking power, you're down to choices 1 and 3. So refugee crises are something that is associated with not South Africa so much, but with the rest of Africa, right, due to the violent conflict. But we didn't really see that happening in South Africa. Okay, so again, Truth and Reconciliation Commission was kind of like the Nuremberg trial of South Africa. Let's figure out who did the wrong things. Okay, they didn't give anybody the death penalty for doing the wrong things because it wasn't like they did a genocide or anything. But it encouraged a lot of people to apologize and try to make amends for all the wrongdoing during apartheid. Because Nelson Mandela thought there would be no way we can move on as a country with all this hate and animosity. We have to take care of that first. Does that make any kind of sense? All right, cool. That's a super, super hard one. Dude, hardest one probably on the whole test or any Regents exam, honestly. Because I think what happens is kids see refugees and they think Africa, that must be the right answer. Okay, but that's not something we associate with South Africa. Well, maybe we should talk about it quickly. Like, what are some places in Africa, specific countries, where there's been conflict and therefore refugee crises? Rwanda is one of them, right? So Rwanda had conflict in the 90s, leading to refugees, but people trying to escape and seek out a better life. There's one going on right now, and it's been going on for decades at this point. Sudan. Okay, and there's a part of Sudan called Darfur, where this has been going on. The people of Darfur don't really want to be part of Sudan anymore. So there's been some rebellion, and then the people of Sudan don't want to see them break away. So there's been conflict there, and the conflict has led to a refugee crisis. Okay, so when you think refugee crisis in Africa, think about those two places, okay, not South Africa. Cool, hopefully that helps. That's super, super hard. Okay, climate change questions. Climate change is not equally felt across the globe, meaning some people are affected more by climate change than others. And neither are its longer-term consequences. Climate change is a threat multiplier. It contributes to economic and political instability and also worsens the effects. Okay, so what it means by that is, yes, the planet maybe getting warmer is tough, right? Maybe the sea levels rise. That's a problem. But that then causes other problems, right? The effects are like multiplied, right? Think about the people who maybe live on a coastline. The water levels rise, now they have to move, right? And now that might cause conflict between the people that are moving and the people that are already living somewhere else, right? So these climate change problems can kind of multiply, is what the source is saying. It propels sudden onset disasters like floods and storms and slow onset disasters like drought and desertification. Tell me about these words. What does it mean to have drought? Right, it's like lack of rainfall, right? When it's drought, we have no rainfall, and we have no rainfall, we have no farming. We did this word the other day. Do you guys remember desertification? What's the root word of that word? Desert, right? Desert is the root word. So what do you think it might mean about something about the desert, right?
Dry, maybe?
It's getting bigger, right? It's drier and bigger, right? If it's climate change, usually we associate climate change with things getting bad, right? Deserts getting bigger is probably not a great thing, right? So maybe we write that down. Desertification means expansion of the desert, right? Deserts expand, it's gonna hurt my ability to farm. And that's another thing that's causing a refugee crisis in Sudan. That Sahara Desert is in that country and the desert's getting bigger. So as people lose the ability to farm, they're trying to move elsewhere, right? So it's kind of like an environmental refugee situation. Those disasters contribute to failed crops, famine, and overcrowded urban centers. Tell me about the word famine. Yeah, you don't have enough food, right? Because your crops are messed up, right? So good call talking about Ireland. What was the Ireland famine? The potato famine, right? Cities, right? So cities are getting overcrowded. Why? People can't farm anymore. They got to find some place to live, right? They'll just go to the supermarket, but the supermarkets aren't going to have any food anymore. Those crises inflame political unrest and worsen the impacts of war, which leads to even more displacement. Displacement means people having to pick up and leave and go somewhere else. There is no internationally recognized legal definition for environmental migrants or climate refugees, so there is no formal reckoning of how many have left their homes because climate change has made their lives or livelihoods untenable, meaning unsustainable. In a 2010 Gallup World Poll, though, about 12% of respondents, representing a total of 500 million adults, said severe environmental problems would require them to move within the next 5 years. That's a lot of people saying within the next 5 years, I can't support myself anymore because of my environment, therefore I'm going to have to move. So, question 26 is, not from the passage itself, but what caused all the things in the passage? What's the best explanation for all these changes? It is 4. Okay, so tell me about greenhouse gas emissions. What does that do?
Like fossil fuels.
Right, we're burning the fossil fuels. Those emissions are trapped in the air and it traps all the heat in, right? This is like a global warming cause. Global warming is a form of climate change. Based on this passage, which statement best describes the author's point of view? Point of view is like how they feel, right? What's their opinion? So what's the author's opinion based on the passage? What do you think his opinion is? International organizations have sufficiently addressed the changes to the climate. If we're addressing the changes, that means we're fixing problems, right? Does it sound like the problems have been fixed? No, right? So we're going to cross off 2. It's 1, yes. Climate change has caused problems, right? And the problems have yet to be fixed. And we can't pick 4 for sure, right? Because they're saying the exact opposite in the source. 28, last one for this, Regents. What was one way the international community responded to the changes described in this passage? And this is an important theme that goes with climate change. It takes more than one country to fix this problem, right? Tomorrow, the United States could say, okay, we're going to ban cars. I mean, they would never do such a thing because they'd be outraged. But let's say they did that, right? No more driving ever. And we would reduce the United States greenhouse gases drastically. But if the other countries of the world don't stop, we still have the same problems. So it takes international cooperation to fix these things. So this is tough, but I think you can eliminate 2 of the answer choices. Tell me an answer choice we can eliminate. We can. Right? The international community does not promote fossil fuels as a way to deal with this problem, right? Because this is just going to make the problems worse. Can we cross out another one? We can cross out 1. Tell me what renewable energy means. You can use it again and again and again. It never runs out. What's a form of energy that never runs out? Solar panels and windmills, right? So we're not going to discourage those things as a way to solve these problems. That makes no sense. So now we're down to 2. Dismantling the World Trade Organization has nothing to do with this. Okay, the World Trade Organization is a group of countries in the world that seek to try to reduce tariffs, because tariffs make things more expensive and slow down trade. Trade stuff has nothing to do with environmental stuff. So 2 is our answer. Signing agreements such as the Kyoto Protocol. But what I want you to write down, in addition to this, is the Paris Climate Agreement. So since the late 90s, the Kyoto Protocol or Kyoto Agreement was in the late 90s. And the Climate Agreement started in 2015. These have been 2 examples of international agreements that the countries have committed themselves to doing to try to reduce the environmental problems, to reduce greenhouse gases, to try to stop global warming. Okay, so these are examples of international cooperation. This was shocking to me that this was on here so specifically, okay? But maybe keep that in the back of your mind as well as this Paris Agreement as well. Super hard.